I've caught a fish before. And so I went with them, and I noticed that what they're doing is a very sophisticated and specialized skill. So as a fisherman, you have your boat, and you have to fold all the nets properly, prepare all the nets, choose all the nets with the right size, the right specifications, and then you get your whole team together to push the boat into the water while someone's steering it to make sure it doesn't flip over. And during that time, I was thinking, sometimes people come in and say, in the villages, there's no technology. People aren't educated. They don't know. But whether or not you have a degree or not, everyone has technology that they use every day that they're very familiar with. Whether or not they developed it themselves, they've designed it. They might design it by learning from their parents, from learning their other community members, but everyone has these unique skills. And I think as engineering trainees and people who want to make the world better, I wonder how can we tap into those skills and actually design things that people want to use that benefit them to make their lives better. And so that begs the question, when we design, who are we actually designing for? Are we designing things that people will want to use, that will actually make their lives better and solve the problems that they're interested in? So I went to Runna, and for the morning I sat and I pulled on the fishing net. Very hard work. And they gave me some fish, my share of fish, which we took home and had a nice barbecue. So I think that even when, even these like very short interactions, when we can build these partnerships, we both as project partners can have payoffs. In this case, some fish that was really tasty. So as an undergraduate student at the University of Maryland, I studied anthropology and biochemistry. And during that time, I had worked with Engineers Without Borders, which is a nonprofit like student group in the US, to travel to Ghana and solve an electricity problem that they were having. Like Sri Lanka, they didn't have enough energy generation capacity at the time. So there are these rolling blackouts. So when their students were studying for A-levels into the night at their boarding school, the lights would cut around 5 p.m. So they weren't able to study for their national exams. So one of the principals at the school brought our team in to build a photovoltaic system to power 2 classroom blocks. So you can see here, we have our battery bank of 12 batteries, our charge controllers, inverter charger, and our solar panels. And so over the course of time, our student engineers worked with engineering, professional engineers and engineering professors to design each element of the system. And I'm not an engineer by any means, but I thought you might like to see the schematic diagram. But it's a 37 kilowatt hour battery bank with a 3 kilowatt array, designing for a 17.7 kilowatt hour load on-grid, off-grid system. So this is the project that I was the project manager for. It's a water tank system for that same boarding school. At the time, because of the power cuts, the city pumping system was going down and often wouldn't be repaired for several days. So there wasn't running water at the facility. So we worked with a local partner to drill a borehole well there, and then build a pump and water tower. So because the problem was there wasn't water, especially during the blackout periods, we would pump water to fill this like 20,000 liter tank during the day when there's energy, and then at night they were able to use the water. So I learned how to design the concrete foundation that this tower would sit on, how to size what the appropriate pump would be, how to size the tank, all these engineering principles. And we worked with our engineering faculty members here to actually design the superstructure and build it. And here's the schematic diagram for that. It ended up being, each of these projects is about like $30,000 US. I think that's like maybe 12 million rupees. Now it's like 12 or so. Recently, I worked with Wathipitiwala Hospital to raise money to build a high dependency unit there for COVID. So at the time, I was a medical student in the US, and I was looking for some way to help Sri Lanka, but I didn't have this engineering background. And so when one of my uncles came with this project to expand the beds at Wathipitiwala, base hospital, Wathipitiwala. I worked with my batch to raise money, and this is where we sent about 12.6 million rupees to build this facility. And so my role in the project was figuring out how to set up the fundraiser, and also just making sure how can we, working with my mother, working with our team to ask, how can we build this without the money going away or being wasted? How can we make sure it's built that's actually in a way that's actually useful? And I found that it was completed in July 2021, and over that time, there were 5 doctors, 14 staff, and they treated over 200 people until when I visited. By the time I visited last December, December 2021. Another project that I'm working on is sometimes design can also look like political advocacy. So a project I'm working on there in the US is trying to expand social welfare, public housing for people that live in the community near the hospital. I'll talk less about this, but it's a lot of social organizing, protest, but also talking to hospital administrators, talking to government officials to think about how can we design like social solutions that are good for everyone in the community. So the reason I give all of that background is that these are the projects that my thinking has come from. And I believe that all the design and engineering projects we do are based on the relationships we build with each other as a project team, but also with the community and many stakeholders that we have. So the overall format of my talk is I'll start by thinking a little bit about how we can develop ourselves professionally, educationally, then talking about how we can develop relationships with all of community members, and then finally end with a discussion of how we apply those things to the engineering design process. So first I'll talk about these relationships. So in these kinds of talks, I'm always curious about how the person got there. So this is kind of a brief history of me. I won't go into everything, but the biggest thing that I've developed over time is this need for like a personal mission. Any type of organization or group together is people whose missions have aligned for some period of time. So my mission is to understand the causes of social inequality, of poverty, and think about how we can develop programs, technologies that can serve poor and marginalized people. And so that mission will differ from person to person. Some people say, I want to develop technology, high technology, that will push the envelope so that to move society forward. That's a different vision than me, but together we can work in a project to figure out how to create something in the world. So this vision came over, this was my time, like my A-levels, this was my university time doing these degrees, working with Engineers Without Borders, teaching. And so now I'm doing it as a medical student and PhD student by studying how technology, society, and politics come together. And then one day I'll be a doctor, but that's a long time from now. So I had this idea of when you're at the end of the road and you lay everything out, it looks like a very neat process, but it's actually quite messy. And so what I've done is I take my mission and then I think about the personal goals that I want to get there. And then I make it into a list of the tasks that I need to do. So I might have goals that are aligned. So I might say, I want to develop these technologies, but I also want to do a degree program. And I also want to earn money for my family one day, to take care of my parents one day. And so you can think about what are the tasks and strategies in your life that can help bring those things together. So you might be doing this technology projects here, and then you say, okay, how can I use that to get a job? How can I use that to decide what university to go to? And that doesn't necessarily mean going abroad, but that can mean how can I serve Sri Lanka through these things that I'm doing? So any questions so far? All good? Okay, great. So next, we develop ourselves, and then we can develop the relationships. So these relationships can be we talk about community, but there's many communities. So my community might be my batch from school. It might be the people that live in my village or my neighborhood, but it can also be the country. And then it can also be partnerships together for formal projects. To talk about that, I'll give an example of this well project and solar project in Ghana. So at the time, we were Engineers Without Borders, the group that I was with. We partnered with a nonprofit called Changing Lives Together. They're a Christian nonprofit that's based in the US, and they provided a lot of the networks and relationships because I lived in Maryland. How could I know anyone in Ghana? And so I did that through this nonprofit. And then we had the actual project partner, this boarding school here, Suman Senior High School, the school where it would go, which has their teachers, the principal, all the students. So we saw the engineering part of it, but there was also this huge set of relationships that come together to make this project happen. So first you think, okay, we're at a school, so there's students. So students have many roles, but one is the end user, right? If we're building the water and photovoltaic systems, so they have water to bathe and also energy to study, the students are the end user. So we need to understand their needs. But then you also have, this is both the local community leadership, the political leadership, and also the administrators at the school. And so the administrators of the school, their concern is that the students aren't passing their exams. So now we need to build something that's addressing their concerns. So we think, okay, how can the solar project address that? And then we have the operators of the system. So this is the plumber at the school. So at the end of the day, he is responsible for actually running the pump, for doing the maintenance. And so we can design whatever we want, but if he doesn't think it's possible to operate, then it won't work. And for him, he is very knowledgeable. He knows more hydraulic engineering than most of the students on our team. And so for him, he can say it won't work, and it might not be a technical problem, but it might be a management problem. He says, I don't have enough money to fix the pipes when they break, to clean things. Similarly, this is the electrician at the school. He's the operator of the photovoltaic system. And so he's a very good electrician, but he brings up stuff actually like the thermal management he brought up, because these inverter chargers can get very hot. The battery banks get very hot. And so we had built a concrete enclosure for them. And so he brought up the point, there's so much dust that collects here, which will damage the technology faster. It gets very hot, which reduces the battery lifespan. We need to address our design by putting a fan and vents there. So it's this conversation with end users. This is the accountant at the school. He was saying, we spoke at length about the financial sustainability of the project. So the actual materials for the photovoltaic system was about $5,000 US at the time. However, the batteries are these lead acid batteries, which only have a life cycle of about 5 years or so. And so he said, we can't afford 2,000, it cost about $2,500 US at the time. He says, we can't afford that. And so then we have a conversation, okay, maybe we can reduce the size of the battery bank. Maybe everyone wants to have a margin, but perhaps we need to reduce it so it's actually affordable for the school. And then the community is an agricultural community, so a lot of the parents make their money working on cashew farms and cocoa farms. And so for them, their concern is the cost of sending their kids to school. So if the accountant says, we need to save money for the battery, someone might say, okay, let's charge the parents more. But the parents have no money because they work in this agricultural sector. So then we start to see the constraints of the project emerging. We say, okay, maybe we need to ask for a different funder. Maybe we need a government funder or a nonprofit funder. These are the nonprofit, this is the nonprofit that we partnered with. They want to see that projects happen. And this is the engineering students. For them, they're interested in also learning the same way that you're self-teaching these skills here because you want to be self-sufficient. You want to have workforce, employability and serve the country. The engineering students are motivated by the same thing. But then there's moments where you say, okay, what should we develop ourselves because it's useful, but what should we outsource to a different contractor? So for the engineering students, building the well and water tower is a great design project, very appropriate for their skill. but perhaps drilling a borehole well is outside of their expertise and not useful. So we contract that out. This is Marvin Weisberg. He's the founder of a foundation. He funded all the projects. For him, what he wants is he wants to see some progress. He wants to see the money spent, you know. It's not always about being as cheap as possible. It's about spending the right amount of money to have the right outcome. But then there's people you don't think about. So these are the laborers who actually poured the concrete and built it. But they're also alumni from the school. And then this is me, and this is our project management team. And we want to have good projects, and we want things to work. So from all of this, I've really thought through how do we design these things together in partnership with appropriate stakeholder engagement. And for me, that looks like identifying who is actually experiencing the challenge that that we're trying to address. How am I related to them? Do I just know them from down the street? Have I only imagined them and never met them? How can they make sure that the things I build are actually useful for them? You ask, how is my vision different from their vision? So I was speaking with some of your project managers here at FabLab, and if your vision is to have a self-sustainable city here, which is a wonderful vision, if you go to a mother down the street, they might say, well, my vision is to send my children to school or make sure they have enough to eat. And so how can we take our big vision of a self-sustainable city and bring that to the level where it meets the needs of the people we're working with? And then sometimes we ask, are we even talking about the same problem? So we might think the problem is that farmers in Sri Lanka don't use fertilizer the right way. They're not using the perfect amount of fertilizer. They're using too much or too little. But perhaps for them, the biggest problem isn't that they don't know how to use fertilizer, but they can't get the fertilizer they want because the import challenges, inflation. And then you ask, how can we each bring our own expertise to the table to make these projects happen? So in this room, we have immense engineering skills, more than I have. I study social society, but we have this engineering skill. And then how do we go to, say, the fishermen who have this, or the farmers who have this amazing skill earned over a lifetime? I can go to Rano one day and I can help pull, but that doesn't mean I understand their technology. I understand what size rope, what size nets, what data fish, how to go. It's impossible for me to know unless I go study them, work with them, learn from them. And so you say, okay, you're an expert in your area. I'm an expert in my area. How can we work together? And so bring to my last point, how can we partner to build both a common vision with common skills to create something? So keeping all of the stakeholders in mind. So lastly, how that actually looks within a project cycle. Have you guys seen this type of diagram, PDSA? New thing? Okay, great. So this is basically there's this idea in like factory workers in like the 20th century about doing this continuous quality improvement. We have our product, we have our process. How can we always be thinking how to make it better for all the stakeholders involved? And this guy Deming came up with this idea, this cycle of planning something, doing something, studying the outcome, and then acting on that, PDSA. So planning, we have an idea. We want to implement a technology. We do it. We take that, go to do, and then we make the thing. We make a prototype. We make a first iteration, and then we study. We talk to the stakeholders. We say, did the thing we build fix the problem? Did it create new problems? And then based on that, we act to change the process. So it's cyclical. And I really recommend early implementation. So we use this in the hospital to reduce complications of procedures, of surgeries, of process problems. And you can actually even take that cycle and kind of cut it and roll it out. and you get like an engineering design process. Have you guys seen this kind of process of prototyping, like product development? So this is from the Engineers At Borders for community projects. But first you start by partnering together, deciding we're going to do this together. Then we assess the problem. We find what is the, like we define what the problem actually is. What are we addressing? And then we decide what are the technical limitations that we need to address. We design it, we take those parameters, we do the calculations, we size the system, you build it, and then you see the outcome. And then, this is a more complicated version, but the same diagram where you start with a concept design, you think about conceptually what you want to do, you think about the system requirements, high level design, detailed design, hardware, software development, this deconstructive definition, and then you reconstruct it with verifying the subsystems, integrating everything, figuring out the operations. I think this might be more familiar for you all. But within that, you ask, as we're doing that, we can get lost. We can say, where is the stakeholder now? Because if we start with only the stakeholder at the very beginning, we completely get lost because every step of the way, the project can change completely. My interest might become the technology, but their interest might be, the situation might even change where the need that we address has changed because of a political problem. And so I really advocate for engaging this network of stakeholders at every step of the project process and have ways that you can incorporate them at the table. So perhaps you have a day where you create an early prototype and then you take it to the field and you implement it. Or perhaps before you even start, you go to the field with the farmer and you don't sell anything, you just watch. You ask questions, you say, why do you do it that way? Or what if we did it this way? And you might ask, what if okay, I see you don't water your plants at these times. What if we had an irrigation system? They say, no, we don't need that. We don't need that here. And then you have to step back and say, okay, I'm a little bit hurt because I came to do an irrigation system, but maybe I can put my ego to the side and say, why do you think that? Or you change your question, you say, okay, what if it looked like this? And you keep iterating and iterating until you design something together. So this is kind of what I'm describing of this process of project development with continuous stakeholder engagement. How can we partner to build projects that meet a common vision? And so some sub questions I always ask are, am I actually meeting the needs of what people are asking for? I have these stakeholders, some are more loud than others, but am I doing the thing that they're asking for? And if not, how can I change that? And then sometimes, the third point, sometimes I think it's an engineering problem, but it's actually a process or a management problem. So we can say, okay, um, the farmers are having a problem because this fertilizer question again. The farmers are having a problem because they don't have enough fertilizer. Well, actually, maybe it's a financial problem or a political problem, as we all know can be cumbersome. And then you can ask, where is my expertise actually useful? So it's not that the farmers don't know what they're doing, it's that they do it a very specific way for a reason. They say, my expertise is the exact right amount of fertilizer to use. So then you see the practice of the farmers, maybe they're using too much, and you say, I've done this work that says you can use less fertilizer for the same result. And then you say it, and then maybe they'll take it, maybe they won't, but you have to go out there. It's always a proposal. You always say, the same way you propose to a board of directors, you propose to a stakeholder. And then you ask, am I actually using all of the experiences that my broad network has? So this is how it might look. This is from the photovoltaic project. So I talked through the partners, the school, the nonprofit, and the problem. We thought the problem was that there wasn't enough electricity, but really the problem is that there are these national power cuts. The political situation at the time meant there's power cuts. But then we say, okay, that's the cause. But what are they really asking for? And they're really asking for lights to study, a fridge for the teacher's lounge, and the computer lab to operate. And figuring out what the real problem is always going to be political because everyone has slightly different problems. But then when you actually go to the design, you say, okay, it's too expensive to build this giant photovoltaic system. So we can help you reduce your usage. We can say, we can have a priority, we can talk about priorities. And if our shared vision is students to study, we prioritize lights and fans, but we don't do the fridge, we don't do the computer lab. And then you say, okay, maybe we can compromise as engineers. We can increase the size of the battery bank of the photovoltaic system. But then maybe we actually need a political move. Maybe we need to go to the district engineer and say, can we get more power for the school? Can we prioritize power for the school? Then we go to implement. So we build the system and we've decided lights and fans, but not the computer. Okay, but we talk to the teachers and they say, actually the computer is the most important thing. So we change it around. We negotiate. So these types of systems come together from all of these different types of negotiations. And we can't have these negotiations unless we go out and ask the end user, not only the funder, not only the technical expert, but the people who are really suffering from the problem and the people who are going to use the system or affect the system. And I think if there's any question about that for your particular projects, we can talk about different strategies and tools to identify who the stakeholders actually are. So a couple closing thoughts here is that as we are designing, there's a need to center the design process around the needs of other people. Second, we can develop ourselves while we're also developing things for other people. So for me, I wanted to build these technologies for community, but at the same time, I learned these leadership skills, which I use now as a medical student. And it seems that you're doing the same thing about learning how to manage a project, how to do technology. Third is that everyone is a designer and everyone has special expertise. We were talking, what's the name of the coconut? What is it? Pol Ula. Do you all know how to use a Pol Ula? Do you all know? Have you used one before? Everyone's used one before. I've 26 years, I've never used one until 2 weeks ago, and for you, that's a simple technology. But for me, it's very complicated because you have to hold it a certain way, point it away from yourself so you don't hurt yourself. It's a very complicated or really nuanced thing, rather. So there's things we can learn from each other. Fourth is avoiding paralysis, always experimenting early, always engaging with the users, and asking questions about what are the problems you're having. And lastly, conflict and compromise are part of the process. You, Someone is always going to ask, what's the point? Why do I need this? And that can be uncomfortable, but you can take that and let it sit and decide for yourself, okay, I don't need to listen to them. They're just a hater. They don't care about what I'm doing. Put that aside. But sometimes you hear that, and that's a signal for us to say, maybe I should go a different direction. Maybe I need to do the technology a different way. And together you can meet in the middle to actually build things in the real world. With that, thank you so much for listening in time. This is my sister and our dog at home. Anytime you want, you can email me. This is my email. And we can think through strategy or product design. And I've got many friends who are in the engineering faculty at University of Maryland in particular. And I think they'd be really excited, especially with your prototyping lab and the work you're doing. So I think we can keep the conversation going. With that, thank you very much. So that was a lot of me talking. Any questions or ideas that you want to talk through? And also, if you ask in Sinhala, it's okay, because I understand okay. I can help translate. So. Yeah.
You mentioned you show the solar system.
Yeah.
And my question is how to how do you take the sustainability? Because Sri Lanka, we see so many grants that are given funds, and they come here and they install some systems. But that system few time ago is not working, and they are maintaining already many problems. But how do you manage? How do you manage?
It's really hard. So what I did, my final year of my degree, I actually spent about 1.5 months in Ghana trying to think about the sustainability. So that's how I met all of the stakeholders and asked the questions and the problems. And kind of a couple takeaways from that. One is that, and also to be clear, um, there's days that it works and there's days that it doesn't. So my organization has built ones that last for a long time and stuff that don't. And so I think one step is designing with the long term in mind. So starting those conversations early. Because as technical people, we like to promise that we can fix this problem, but it might only be we can fix this for 5 years. And we have a realistic conversation about what need we're actually meeting. Second is like reducing cost and maybe operational complexity as possible. With this particular system, we found that there was a lot of local experience, local parts, local knowledge for how to do this. And the challenge was the financial sustainability. And so that's not a place where we had expertise. And that's why you have to bring in partners that have that experience. Truthfully, for this project, I don't think it had the financial sustainability that I would have wanted. But we did the best of the partner knew they'd have to replace it. They knew the cost, and we did the best of explaining. We can't control the future, but we can bring people. We can set it up for success. Um, the other thing with actually the Wathipitiwala HDU, um, this unit had a lot of use during the COVID times, but recently it's not being used as much because the hospital volumes are down and the other hospital beds have more capability, more oxygen capability actually. And so part of our strategy here was thinking, how can we buy things that can be used beyond COVID? So we focused on the oxygen and the kind of telemetry, the cardiac physiologic parameter like monitors, because that's something that the hospital could continue to use after COVID. So, in especially in places where there isn't much money, there's a lot of flexibility in how we do things. We use one part for the wrong thing, like not what it was designed for. And so we wanted to make sure that we can provide our end users with tools that have flexibility. I hope that answers. It's a non-answer, but it's the things I think about.
And also, I'm very interested about your water
Oh yeah,
project.
yeah.
And I would like to share some my own
Please.
experience. Actually, this area I already told you is a agricultural
Yeah.
area. So, 1975, around 1975, this area we have a water tank.
Yeah.
Like we call Bavel.
Yeah.
So we have we can yeah we have a water stock and Sri Lanka we start conditions environment conditions in the in the drought.
Drought.
In our dry season, we are using the tank water to cultivate the crops, and that time the government installed like a system, water pumping system. We called it Usan water supply system because we have a river around 2 kilometers. Yeah, and they use a water pumping system to pump the water, and they use water, I think, runners like water runners and refilling the water tank.
Yeah.
But the project was stopped after two years because the problem is it's very expensive because the motors are running through the electricity. So government cannot fund for that, and also the farmers in this area, they don't know how the water coming from. They think that it's
Automatic, like
automatically, and they don't. I think the irrigation department asking from them, can you give some money to pay for that bills and maintain. But farmers say, no, we don't need that your system. Like I earlier mentioned. So I like to in my I have planned to restart that project.
That's wonderful.
Very important for this area, and also I think that okay, we don't need government electricity. We can install a solar system and pump system. Can use that electricity to use into the water pump. But I think
I think that's a great idea, and I think like what you're describing is a very complicated mix of a technical problem, a social problem, and a management problem. You know, the technical problem is what is the tool, how are we going to power this pump, you know? But then you have this management problem of how do we fund it? And there's a lot of research about paying for water, paying for funding these things. And in my opinion, actually, those tend to work, especially for a common good like that, those work better when it's a government funded project because they can collect taxes. They can collect taxes based on income, based on how much you're using in a way that, you know, asking every farmer for, you know, a little bit of money, it's different, you know, it can be more, it might be better to have the control of like a government sponsored project. And then you're talking about the social issue of when farmers are using it, whether they have money to pay or not, et cetera. So I think what I would encourage is when you're doing technical design, you choose what type of motor, what type of solar panel, what type of, you know, electronics, what control system. And what I would encourage is when you're doing this conceptual design, also think about what the management structure would look like. So, for example, and that's where you need to have your stakeholders on board early. So you can go to the irrigation department. You should go to the irrigation department and say, I want to do this project. What do you think? You know, if possible. And they may have a regional engineer who you can speak to. And so you might find out that then when you're doing your like different alternatives comparisons, you can say that I have you can compare, okay, it's a motor, it's funded by the government, but it's a solar panel. You can compare that to a motor funded by private, but it's a solar panel. Compare that to a motor funded by private, but it's grid electricity. And then the technical question is, what is the cost of grid electricity versus solar panel output? Does that make sense? Like you have to compare both the expected operational management with the technicals like together. I think that's kind of how I would start to approach it. We should talk though, because that's exciting.
2022. Um, now, now we are dealing with only Kurunegala district area. We need to expand our business for the whole area of Sri Lanka, and we try to after the 2 year, 5 year, we need to go to the international market, uh, achieve international market. You have any suggestion for the do it? For,
Yeah. So this is making the inverters, correct?
yeah,
The invert, like making the PC, like the home, like the your FabLab made inverters.
yeah,
Okay. Um, so I think that like the best opportunity for uptake is if you have a product that meets a need that a lot of people have. You know, to go to the international market, it has to have the right you know, in biology you say niche, you know, like the right place, the right fit for the situation. So I would actually start with, before thinking even about international market, how can I make my product work in Kurunagala? Like Kurunagala becomes the laboratory, the testing site, and you say, okay, what are the, I can introduce it to people, and you can do, it's really like market research, right? You ask, okay, what are the situations in which people are using it? Do they like it? Do they not? Is it, are they okay with the price? And then what are the ways I can change my design to make it a better fit? And then as you're expanding like Sri Lanka wide first, you can say, okay, I've decided there's no such thing as a universal technology. Anyone can use it, but it fits a specific situation. So like we were saying before, we want it to be used in the household. So or whatever, you figure out what situation you want and you can market it, you can test it in those situations and see how it's, what the uptake is. And that also gives you data on stuff like life cycle, because perhaps these things fail after a couple years and maybe that's okay, but maybe that's not. And so you can get a sense of if the cost and the benefit match. And if it fails after a couple years, maybe you, instead of domestic use, you market it for agricultural use, like small scale agricultural use. So you find the right niche for it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question. And actually, to your point, I think like rapid prototyping and getting into the field early is really important, because you can have this amazing technology, but if no one uses it, what's the point? And so taking it, testing it, talking to users, and then constantly iterating like that, that's, I think that's how you make something that people want.
And I think this is a good time to introduce to the local market.
Exactly.
yes.
Yeah, it's booming now.
First, we must reach the local market.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is a good time here too, people are
Good
really
opportunity.
Good opportunity, but some people try to lower price. See, but Sri Lankan mentality is
Yeah.
lower price. I, but uh,
But you know, lower price is one thing, but you also have this like technology risk too. So when you're talking about, you're deploying a novel fabrication method, right? A whole, like a local fabrication method. And so there's a certain risk for that. Like not everyone, like if someone has money, they might prefer to get something from a factory, like, you know, abroad. And so for you developing this product, you have to figure out, okay, in what situation would someone think that the technology risk, my product, and the cost make sense? Say again?
warranty and
Yeah, you know, there's no warranty because it's a local product. And so maybe for a high reliability situation, I would be less likely to take it. Like if I am IT, work from home, my job is my electricity, I don't want it, you know. But if I have a small irrigation system, I'm a like industrial farmer, like I'm actually trying to do stuff, I'm interested in technology to expand my operation, maybe that's the right fit.
yeah, you should go for lower and after that is population.
Yeah.
your lifetime warranty for
Or you have a
so
website?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you can market it.
Yeah.
This is not a question.
Yeah.
yeah.
What your idea? In Sri Lanka, we are facing some tough situation, but this is not a to the point of Sri Lanka. I think I want to ask from you, what do you think about any cultural effect have for this situation? In not Sri Lanka, you live in Ghana. I think you mentioned, and what is the effect of the culture?
Yeah. That's a great question. When you ask a question and it's exactly, there's so many thoughts about it. So I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I have a lot of thoughts about culture. But I think um, the ways that culture makes a lot of things. One is the knowledge you have, the way you think the world fits together, but it's also the practices, the skills, and the way you talk about it and your expectations. So in Ghana, we thought the culture would be whether people want the technology or not. We thought, okay, this is advanced, this is whatever. But actually, most people had solar. Like people were it's like Sri Lanka now, where people who can afford it are getting solar because they don't want blackouts. So the technology was there. Um, the cultural thing was really the maintenance kind of culture. And that's not because they do things any differently than here or in the US even, but it's because there are certain realities to what a school can do. So the example I give is if I went to my secondary school, my high school where I did A levels in the US, they're very good they have a principal, they have an accountant, they're very good at managing the education, but they couldn't run a well because they don't have an engineer to run a well. So you say the culture at my high school in America is you couldn't run this well. And the same thing was there. But actually, in some ways, at Ghana, they were better equipped to run a well. But the culture was all of the money that came in from the government, they had to spend on school expenses, uniforms, food, facilities, staff payment. So that was the culture. Money comes in, money comes out. And so it's very hard to change something like that. So you say, okay, how can I come in and establish something separately to fund this? So that's kind of how culture comes in, I think. It's more like the routines that are really hard to break. And sometimes it's better not to break them, but to go with them. Because I think you can spend a lot of effort, because culture comes from us talking to each other. You think of how many people have talked to each other in Sri Lanka. It's a very big thing. It's better. I think it's better to figure out how to work with these tendencies. Yeah, I think.
Online. Online එකකට ඉවතුනේ.
ඔන්ලයින් ඉන්න කට්ටියටත් පුළුවන් අහන්න ප්‍රශ්න.
Kavit, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
But I don't know whether Nipun can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you,
Yeah,
Susanta.
yeah. Nipun, I am from Kandy. My name is Susanta Patirana. In fact, I listened to your whole presentation. In fact, the diagrams were not visible to us, but anyway, that's all right. Hello, are you all right? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
I can.
yeah. Nipun, especially about your two projects you mentioned. One is the water project in Ghana. Other one is the Sri Lankan one, Wathipitiwala Hospital project. Now,
Yeah.
let us say the water project. You mentioned about the sustainability of the project at one stage. Yeah.
Yes.
So what
So-
I understand is it is the sustainability of completing the project successfully, and after that the operational sustainability. Is it?
Yes.
Yes. My question is actually this is a project at a particular location in Ghana, but the country may need many of such projects, or the whole Africa and the whole country might need similar projects, maybe 1,000 times or and so. But uh, are you bothering, or are you considering the sustainability in terms of repeating the project at several locations, or number of locations, or hundreds of locations? Maybe after studying the project, you can have a post-mortem. This is my view. Post-mortem to see, are there any possibilities of reducing the cost? Are there any possibilities of including new features so that the overall cost and the benefit is going to be enhanced, so that it can be repeated without difficulty in a different location and so on? That is what I mean as the sustainability of the project. It can be 10, 15 years, or 2, 3, or maybe 10, 15 countries even. That is sustainability, what I would like to think of.
Yes.
Is it meaningless, or it
No,
has some meaning?
that's a wonderful question, actually, Santa, because I have a different talk where that's like my main focus, and I I'll start by thinking about, you're asking this question about scale, really. Like, does the scale of this project, can it be repeated? Does it make sense? Is kind of part of what I'm getting. And so the sustainability doesn't scale linearly. Like a bigger project or a smaller project isn't necessarily more likely to deliver the desired result at cost for the right amount of time, and so with the same quality of operation. And so for this project, we found, I was concerned that, Ghana, this place in Ghana, it's not the middle of, I mean, people call it the middle of nowhere, but it really isn't. It's more like Sri Lanka, where you have these centralized, very strong infrastructure and like bureaucracy and like governance infrastructure. So this town also had a town water tank, a town like 4 or 5 pump stations and whatnot. And so for in my mind, that government infrastructure is actually much more sustainable, because the cost per unit volume of water is cheaper at that larger scale, and the government can better centralize, human resources like engineers, the ability to fund like major infrastructure projects, etc. And so this became a question of, should we do this small scale project, or should we try to support this broader citywide issue? And I think that at the time we chose the small project because that's what the skills and money we had to do. But I wish we actually engaged the city earlier. However, later we found, when we spoke to the city, they actually liked the small project because the school was actually one of the biggest users of water in the city. And so having the school have its own separate system of this size made sense to them. But that becomes a political question. And so I think for the types of, I think you're describing this kind of dispersed, many, many small scale infrastructures. There's a certain optimization where the cost of running the system is low enough that we can tolerate a certain amount of failure. However, I think the failure rate of those dispersed systems can actually be kind of high. There's a study on these water projects that a lot of these NGO funded community water well projects fail very quickly. They fail in the first 5 years of operation. And so I think that, especially for the Sri Lankan context, where we have such, at least a history of these strong institutions and infrastructure, I think that it's not worth throwing all of that away, when for these kind of high risk, kind of dispersed projects. I think that there's ways, actually more of a political project of, as engineers, as concerned students, being able to say, I want to make our town system make our town water tank run better, and coming together for that. Does that kind of address your question a little bit? I think I got parts of it, but
Yeah. In fact, it is good. It is good to note that your effort and then the team effort and then various sectors are being combined in order to complete the project and so on. So that is these to be sustainable. My question was actually I was thinking of if you want to repeat such things, there is a chance that funding will pour in and then everybody will be convinced as such. If you do a little more analysis about this project and then do a post-mortem so that it can be presented with new features in future for other places. That's good.
yeah,
Anyway, thanks, Nipun.
yeah, of
Uh,
course. Thank you.
I have noted there are communities in Sri Lanka. In fact, I'm in contact with some of these communities. We don't know exactly their problem is, but we know that they have a lot of hardships. But when we get in for the first time, somebody, the leader of the village, maybe the temple, might say that okay, these people don't have money. They have lost their employment. They don't have a way to eat, and then and so on. So the first step was some funding has to be pumped in, dry rations and then 5,000 rupees and so on. It was the case during COVID.
Hmm.
But later on, when funds are also pouring in, we try to disperse them in the village. We also feel, and then the village chief also feels that the money should not be dispersed freely like that
Mm.
for their needs, their day-to-day needs. We will try to empower the people so that they can go ahead with their own skill development and earning and so on. And we will be able to get into the society in solving their problems.
Hmm.
After that, we will come across various problems. One,
Yeah.
farming problem, number one. Number two, health problems. Number three, electricity and related problems. So they are not aimed for big projects and so on, but as such these are small communities like 50 families in the village and so on. But
Yeah.
let us see. I will send you an analysis later when we come across
Yeah.
some success stories or failure stories.
Thank you, Sansa. I actually, a comment to your point about dispersing funds freely versus this empowerment and development. I really, this is my personal view. I really believe in a mix of both
Mix
because
of
I
both,
think,
yeah.
yeah, because I think um, sometimes, okay, so I study actually the idea of empowerment, and sometimes that's actually much more appealing to actually Western funders. Like they're the ones who like the idea of empowerment because for them, it turns this charity into an investment. However, sometimes in the village, that doesn't happen. So and I were actually talking about these microfinance loans
Hmm.
often. And so that's an example of empowerment where someone can get a small loan to start a business. However, if that loan starts a business that doesn't go anywhere, so let's say um, you live in a remote village, you start a handicraft business, you think you can sell the handicrafts. Who can you sell the handicrafts to if there's no tourists there, if things aren't moving, if people in the village, who is going to buy these things? And so then afterwards, the debt collector comes to get the loan with interest. And so I think that sometimes with the empowerment, we have to be careful to make sure that the things we're building is actually good for people and they can make decisions for themselves about what the right way to do that is. Um, but I think especially things like if some funds go to these basic survival, um, it can be hard to target the it has to be targeted to the problem you're trying to solve. So if the problem is we want school children to have adequate nutrition because they're not eating enough protein, then maybe instead of dispersing money freely, we give a ration like these dry rations or a ration of meat or eggs or whatnot. But if the problem is we see that the cost of food is too high, then maybe or the cost of people can't pay their school bills, then maybe dispersing money freely is the right way. But there's a political. I see a political process of negotiating what the problem is and how to the mechanism to address it.
Thank you, Nipuna.
Thank you, Santa.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, hi, Nipun. I'm Chaminda. I'm a co-founder of FabLab. I was very much excited and interested what you have been saying. In fact, it's really interesting. First of all, thank you very much for coming to FabLab and had a I don't know, maybe you visited the place and talked to the
Yeah.
young engineers there. In fact, your line of work is very actually interesting. I read your profile also. So, for example, I teach project management. So, in the recent times, there is the trends towards this, the projects done with the stakeholders, multi-stakeholders,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, started with from the users or beneficiaries as the first starting point, and also you showed us Deming cycle.
Yeah.
The place you work with engineer stands frontiers, right? That's in,
Yes.
yeah, okay. So congratulations, and I'm also very impressed that you have been actually brave enough to go to Ghana to work and also to Sri Lanka. So your the diversity of your knowledge is very I think it's really rich. So I just have one, maybe two questions now.
Please.
Now in your career, now I understand you are going to be like a medical professional. So
Yes.
will you think this expertise from Ghana, Sri Lanka, elsewhere, also carving into engineering and design, will it be useful for your future career? How you are going to kind of utilize that? Or is it
Yes.
just your break from your traditional medical profession or just I don't know. So that's one question. Maybe you can answer that and then I can go in.
That's a Thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate your kind words. That's $1 million question for me. And so part of actually the career I've chosen is this joint medical doctor and PhD in this anthropology, studying these things that I've discussed. And the reason I chose that career is that training is that I'm interested in doing community program development, perhaps with WHO or government. And so I really, I think a lot of these kind of quality improvement, design skills apply to social program development because it is often these multi-sectoral, multi-methodological approaches to addressing a problem. And so the type of problem I'm interested in is even like a question like dengue in Sri Lanka. And so with like dengue, you first think it's a public health problem, which it is, but then it also becomes a process problem of I think there's a study like 40% of dengue cases in Sri Lanka are related to poor solid waste management. So the trash, because that's where mosquitoes breed. And so for me, I'm interested in okay, how can we address this kind of solid waste management problem with not only the right technical management solution, but also given the landscape of funders, different political interests, et cetera. So I really see myself in that type of management kind of program development role. Um, and then if you're interested, we can talk more about the hospital, but some of those dynamics come in taking care of patients. Often in patients have other social needs, like sometimes they can't come to the hospital because they don't have money or they're injured at their job. And those are the types of things I'm interested in kind of clinically. I want to be an emergency medicine physician. So doing that kind of social minded work is my interest.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Excellent. So I think I wish that you get that opportunity because as I know, the academic disciplines are very strict.
yeah.
They are not kind of still welcoming people like you. So all the best for that. So
Thank
I
you.
think it will be different. So the second thing is now you mentioned that you have a network of professional network of different professions like engineering.
Yeah.
Now I think we are also now, as you know, we are also working with multidisciplinary approaches in designing things and also doing things. So, for example, what you see at FabLab is mainly our real design and
Yeah.
prototyping work. But beyond that, we also do fundraising, project management, public relations, political campaigning,
Yeah.
different things. So we are very much interested to, when Veshan mentioned about you, you are very much interested to have a collaboration. So what kind of networking you have and how, what are your plans to work, for example, in Sri Lanka, what kind of work you are interested to work? Just
Yeah.
for future work, we can discuss, of course, later, but
Yeah. That's a great question. I kind of how do I say this? The right opportunity comes up and I jump for it and we see how to build the networks, you
yes.
know? So maybe we can start with maybe I can introduce people here. So first off, with like the FabLunka, like what you're doing here, I'm like just incredibly impressed with the makerspace and like the things that you're building. Like I'm describing a very specific type of community project, and not everything has to fit that mold. And so I think especially the work with PCB development, the drones, all of the work that FabLunka is doing is amazing, and like I can just see the leadership interest and management interest and just desire to make the country better. And that's the reason why I was attracted to this group to begin with, because I think that like it's not only like technological hype cycle or personal development, it's both personal development and country development together. So I think that's like that's just amazing. I love that. Um, in terms of my network, so this white guy here, this is my friend Josh. So Josh is a instructor at University of Maryland, and so he leads the first year engineering design course. So they do a lot of the skills you do here: 3D printing, machining, robotics, to do an autonomous robot project. So that teaches a lot of these same kind of management skills that you're learning here. So he has a mechanical engineering background and engineering instruction. I think he'd be very excited to work with FabLunka and introduce the team. Maybe we can bring him next summer. And so, um, but out of that engineering, so that's kind of like the technical side. And we're attached to some other professional engineers in the US. Um, the social side, it's kind of, I'm looking to do my PhD like dissertation work. So I'm kind of dancing around, seeing what types of things people are working on. But actually, through like my mother and through our networks in Sri Lanka, we have a lot of strength in kind of the professional engineering networks in Sri Lanka and also the medical, like physician community in Sri Lanka. So with Wathipitiwala Hospital, we kind of built some. My role was actually quite small. My role was like the fundraising role. But in Sri Lanka, our networks here were actually doing the groundwork to establish the connections of the hospital, to do the import export kind of management, and whatnot. And I think for the right project, we can like pull it together. But it would have to be this kind of collaborative process of development for the right skill, the right project. Lastly, I have a good friend who works for USAID. They do the international, like have the U.S. government sponsored international development, and they have a clean ocean, clean cities program in Sri Lanka, and they're looking to fund kind of projects to address like pollution in Sri Lanka, solid waste management, and so I think if this might be a good network to try to pull people together that are interested in that, and that's a connection I can help out with too.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we already applied one USAID project and we are really looking for.
Excellent,
Yeah, yeah. So,
excellent.
yeah, thank you very much. It was great to know you, and also thank you for coming and talking to our team. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there on that day, so I'm in Colombo. But congratulations, we'll be in touch. I'm sure you are taken care of well in our absence. Yamani, Kavit, and people. So all the best for your rest of you. How long you are going to be in Sri Lanka?
So this is I'm here for 3 weeks, but I actually leave on Sunday. So this is the
Okay.
end of my time.
Yes. So all the best, and then we'll be in touch. I think Gration has your connection and connectivity, so we'll be in touch. Thank you very much. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for your lovely team.
Maybe you can go now if you can, maybe you can throw the people from online because you can have a discussion locally.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Adios. Yeah.
Auf Wiedersehen. And even if you
Okay,
uh,
Kavit, Nipun, bye. We'll see you later.
thank you,
Okay, sir.
Susanta.
Okay,
Bye.
Thank you
okay,
again.
bye.
We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever is no pressure either, because it's quite a lot of talking. But also, if you want to even like think about where to start with some of these projects, if you're interested in that community facing side or implementation, I have like some activities in mind too that we could do if you'd like. But whatever whatever you want, whatever your time is good for.
So yeah, the kind of yeah. Somehow we have make it yeah. And so yeah, if we are doing I will teach students to share that information about how they use technologies. But is the one part of our Sri Lankan society. Here are small part. So they are doing so many farmers like that. So what do you think that any suggestion do you have how to
It's um, it's really tough because when you're mission oriented, you want to do everything. Right? You want to develop the technology, do the education, do the community project. But there's only so many of you, so much time, so much money, and so um, you can make a you can sit together and decide what is the right, how do we want to allocate our resources, financial, like human resources, knowledge, time as a resource, material. And so I think that deciding if you want to be primarily and it can change over time too based on who's here. So deciding if you want to be primarily product development, education, or community project. And if you do that, it sounds like you already have a lot of organization, but like separating those tracks and then having someone in charge of each of those things. And it seems like you have different projects at different stages too. And so I think just what some of the challenges are, each of those things can be endless places where money and time and effort can go into. Like you could spend forever doing these community kind of education or teaching talks, whatever, and youth involvement. But like, you want to make sure that it's actually useful at going somewhere. So you can say, if we're doing education programs for children, secondary school, university, what's the goal here? And the goal might just be exposure to engineering kind of things. And so maybe if we're talking about year 5, year 6, year 7, they don't need a 1-year course, maybe a 1-day, half-day workshop where they can play with these things, get exposure. Maybe that's the right thing. But then maybe for the university students, after A-level students, the 1-year course is the right thing. So thinking thinking very specifically about what they're getting out of it and why they're doing it. Community programs, the same thing. Sometimes we do a project because it's developing ourselves, like I think especially a lot of the, I built a quadcopter drone just for myself, like with the first person view, just for for fun, and that's not going to help anyone. That's for me. That's my personal project, and that's good. Like that's good to have personal projects too. But you sit down and decide, okay, I really want this to serve my country in this particular way. Then you have to sit down and do that strategy of how do I make it fit, because it's not automatic. It's not just developing it. I mean, doing the personal project is good because then that develops you, and then you can serve your country in this job or whatnot, your startup, whatever. But if you want your product to serve the country, it's important to like sit down and decide, think through logically, like how is this going to work? How is this going to fit? And do all of these things. So I think it really depends on what yeah. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. And especially for when you're thinking about kind of poor kind of segments of society, like people that don't have those opportunities or don't have much money right now. Everyone doesn't have money right now, but like really, really struggling. Those are the places where talking to them and figuring out what are they actually dealing with is really important, because they might not have time to mess around with things that aren't going to get them, settled, get their life stable. And so that's where you have to be very kind of thoughtful about the ethics of the situation too. Like, do I actually have I have the best intentions, but am I misleading people, or am I over or underestimating the risk to them of like this time investment? So this way. Yeah. Ethical, that's the ethics side of it that I think about.
We are research level.
Yeah.
So how to control cost?
Yeah. So this is, what kind of costs are you thinking about mostly?
Because we are not generate any profit.
Yeah.
Still, so that's not we need.
No, but to sustain this
Yeah.
organization. Yeah.
Because still Christians give
Funding.
so he pumps.
Yeah. So I think this is where prioritizing, like, what is this organization actually doing? Like, what is our main mission here? Because I think, like, even, or what are our three main priorities here? And so even, like, starting a company to do like this PCB development, this inverter like development, that's its own company, and so then you can make a decision. Okay, we've started and built the skills here. Maybe this should be a standalone company. Like, we should figure out how this can become a standalone company and a startup, and then you can attract your own money, separately. Alternatively, maybe it's okay to operate at a loss. Like, maybe we say this is primarily a educational and person development program. In that case, maybe we should operate at loss, and we maybe Creation Uncle can't fund it forever, but maybe we apply to foreign funders that want to do this development. I don't know what universities are like, but maybe we're a private university for a funder. And then I think with the last thing is, it's okay to have these multiple missions, but how can we have a common pool of raw materials, machines, people that are needing all these things? And so you say, okay, these are the people I have. how is their time being spent? And you say, okay, they have this personal project, and I want to make sure they have time to do this project. However, together we're prioritizing the inverter, we're prioritizing agriculture. And there's kind of these high level strategy things that you decide, what are we going to push right now? And that can also be influenced by what's happening in the country. So sometimes we have a lot of ideas because we want to help. Our first response is we want to help, but sometimes we have to be strategic about the time scale that help can come on, what will happen, And so something like fertilizer, that's always going to be a problem here, even if the economic crisis ends. But maybe other situations will change, and that technology makes less sense. So kind of this really strategic planning. What kind of planning are you doing now? Or like, what does that management look like for FabLab right now? I guess, yeah.
Are we still finding what is the best way to
Yeah.
But these days we are doing like this. I don't have any management knowledge.
Neither do I. It's all self-taught. Yeah.
So I can tell you like this. We have many projects. So everyone is assigned to their own projects. Like,
Yeah.
I am assigned in the LoRa and Sanjoy assigned to the solar system.
Yeah.
Like that. So we have we need money. So we are like Amani manager. She gives us to like a check. We can write it like we need a 100,000, like 10,000, like money. So and we buy the materials and services, and we collect the bills and
Yeah.
give to her, and she manage everything. So, that is the current situation. But we feel yes, a next level management.
Yeah.
We need next level management because sometimes we are stuck because our money bank account is
Yeah.
not empty
Yeah.
and no any money, but we have to do so many things and we need to call to Grayson sir, and he sent money, and it came to Sri Lanka within a week because but it is not the time to stay because we have to. So we because I think we don't have any proper plan. So
Yeah.
I think if we, but the problem is we all are we are actually we are still young, and we are still studying, and we need to learn so many things. Uh, but other organizations, I think they have a proper management, like channels, and they are managing everything, and our like we have to do only our project,
Yeah.
not think about how many money goes. But our team, this is our all
Yeah.
things. So we think every time, okay, if I buy this thing, how much effect to other projects. So that's the main problem.
I do think though, it's appealing to think that if we have another level of management, it fixes the